The bright lights of Alice Tully Hall shone down on the grand piano like stars in the night sky. Marcus Beaumont walked across the stage with confidence, his black suit perfectly pressed and his shoes shining under the spotlights. The audience sat in complete silence waiting for the magic to begin. Marcus was 45 years old and had been playing piano since he was 5. He was famous all over the world. People called him a genius. Tonight, he was performing at one of the most important fundraising events of the year. Rich people had paid thousands of dollars just to hear him play. He sat down at the beautiful Steinway grand piano and placed his fingers on the keys. The concert hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then he began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. The music filled the air like magic. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys faster than lightning. Each note was perfect. Each phrase told a story. The audience watched in amazement as he played the most challenging parts without even looking at his hands. For 35 minutes, Marcus took everyone on a musical journey. The piece started soft and gentle like a whisper in the wind. Then it grew stronger and more powerful, like a storm building over the ocean. His hands danced across the keys, creating sounds that seemed impossible for just one person to make. The people in the audience forgot about everything else. They forgot about their phones, their worries, and their daily problems. All they could think about was the beautiful music flowing from the piano. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat with their mouths open in wonder. Marcus knew he was giving the performance of his life. He could feel the power of the music flowing through him. Every note came from deep in his heart. This was why he had practiced 8 hours a day for 40 years. This was his moment to shine. When he played the final note, the silence lasted for what felt like forever. Then suddenly, the entire audience jumped to their feet. They clapped their hands so hard it sounded like thunder. People shouted, "Bravo!" at the top of their lungs. Some threw flowers onto the stage. Marcus stood up and bowed deeply. He smiled widely, feeling proud and happy. This was what he lived for: the applause, the admiration, the feeling of being the best at what he did. He bowed again and again as the clapping continued. The concert hall was one of the most beautiful places in New York City. It had red velvet seats and golden decorations on the walls. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks. Everything about the place screamed wealth and culture. Tonight's event was special. It was a fundraiser for the city's music program for children. Tickets cost $5,000 each. Only the richest and most important people in the city were invited. Business owners, famous actors, politicians, and art collectors filled every seat. These people didn't just come for the music. They came to see and be seen. They wore expensive clothes and jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. The women's dresses sparkled with diamonds. The men's watches were worth small fortunes. But despite all their wealth and importance, even these sophisticated people were amazed by Marcus's performance. They knew they had just witnessed something truly special. Marcus Beaumont wasn't just a pianist, he was an artist who could touch people's souls with his music. As the applause finally died down, Marcus walked off the stage feeling like a king. He had conquered another audience. He had proven once again that he was the greatest pianist of his generation. The feeling of success flowed through his body like warm honey. Backstage, people rushed to congratulate him. The event organizers shook his hand and told him it was the best performance they had ever heard. Famous musicians who were in the audience came to praise his technique. Critics who had written about music for decades said they had never heard Rachmaninoff played so beautifully. Marcus accepted all the praise with a smile, but inside he wasn't surprised. He knew he was brilliant. He had worked harder than anyone else to get where he was. He deserved every bit of admiration he received. The intermission was about to begin. Soon the wealthy audience would leave their seats and gather in the lobby for champagne and fancy appetizers. They would talk about the performance and try to impress each other with their knowledge of classical music. Marcus changed out of his formal concert clothes and put on a more casual suit for the reception. He looked at himself in the mirror and smiled. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His face showed confidence and success. He was ready to meet his fans and enjoy their admiration. He knew that many people would want to talk to him during the intermission. They would tell him how wonderful his playing was. They would ask for autographs and take photos with him. Some might even offer him new opportunities to perform in other cities or countries. This was Marcus's favorite part of any concert, the time after the performance when he could bask in the glory of his success. He loved hearing people tell him how talented he was. He enjoyed seeing the look of awe in their eyes when they met him. As he prepared to leave his dressing room and join the reception, Marcus felt on top of the world. He had given another perfect performance. The audience loved him. The critics would write glowing reviews. His reputation as the world's greatest pianist was stronger than ever. He had no idea that in just a few minutes everything would change. He didn't know that this night would become one of the most important and embarrassing moments of his life. He couldn't imagine that a simple decision he was about to make would teach him a lesson he would never forget. For now, Marcus Beaumont was simply a successful man walking toward a room full of people who adored him. The champagne was waiting. The praise was coming, and he was ready to enjoy every second of it. The lobby of Alice Tully Hall buzzed with excitement during the intermission. Waiters in white jackets carried silver trays filled with champagne glasses that sparkled like liquid gold. The wealthy guests gathered in small groups, their voices mixing together like a symphony of conversation. Marcus walked into the reception area and was immediately surrounded by admirers. A famous actress in a red dress rushed over to tell him how his music had moved her to tears. A wealthy businessman wanted to discuss hiring Marcus for his daughter's wedding. Everyone wanted a piece of his time and attention. He moved through the crowd like a celebrity, shaking hands and accepting compliments with practiced ease. This was his world, a place where art and money came together, where talent was rewarded with gold and praise. Marcus felt completely at home among these sophisticated people. "That was absolutely magnificent," said Mrs. Wellington, an elderly woman who donated millions to the arts every year. Her pearl necklace was worth more than most people's houses. "I've never heard Rachmaninoff played with such passion." Marcus smiled and nodded politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Wellington. It's always a pleasure to perform for people who truly understand music." As he talked with the guests, Marcus noticed movement in the corners of the room. People in simple uniforms were quietly working, cleaning up spilled drinks and replacing empty champagne glasses. They moved like shadows, trying not to disturb the important guests. Most of the wealthy attendees didn't even notice these workers. To them, the staff were invisible, just part of the background that made their evening possible. But Marcus, still feeling powerful from his performance, found himself watching them with interest. That's when he saw her. Sarah Chen was 28 years old, though she looked younger. She wore a plain gray uniform that marked her as part of the cleaning crew. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she moved quietly through the crowd, collecting dirty glasses and wiping down tables. Sarah tried to stay out of everyone's way. She had learned that rich people didn't like to be reminded that regular working people were around during their fancy events. She focused on her job, picking up glasses and emptying ashtrays while trying to remain invisible. But Marcus was watching her now. Something about the way she moved caught his attention. While the other workers seemed nervous around the wealthy guests, Sarah carried herself with a quiet dignity. She didn't look down or act ashamed of her work. She simply did her job with care and precision. Marcus was still feeling high from his successful performance. The applause was still ringing in his ears. The praise from the audience had filled him with confidence and, if he was honest, a bit of arrogance. He felt like he was on top of the world, and everyone else was far below him. "Look at that," he said to a small group of guests who had gathered around him. He pointed toward Sarah, who was carefully stacking glasses on her tray. "I bet she's never heard real classical music in her life." The guests followed his gaze and chuckled politely. They weren't sure where Marcus was going with this observation, but they were interested to hear what the famous pianist had to say. Dr. Hamilton, a music professor from Columbia University, adjusted his glasses and smiled. "Well, Marcus, not Everyone has had the privilege of a musical education. Classical music can seem quite foreign to people from different backgrounds. Marcus nodded, but there was a mischievous glint in his eyes. The success of his performance had made him feel bold and playful. He was surrounded by people who hung on his every word, and he was enjoying the power that came with being the center of attention. "You know," Marcus said, his voice getting slightly louder, "I think it would be educational for all of us to hear what happens when someone with no musical training tries to play classical music. It might help us appreciate real artistry even more." Some of the guests looked confused, but others began to understand what Marcus was suggesting. A few smiled with anticipation, ready to be entertained by whatever the great pianist had planned. Sarah was now working near their group, carefully cleaning a nearby table. She could hear parts of their conversation, but she tried not to listen. Rich people sometimes said things that would hurt her feelings if she paid too much attention. She had learned to focus on her work and ignore their words, but Marcus wasn't done yet. The idea that had formed in his mind was growing stronger. He was feeling mischievous and wanted to entertain his audience with something unexpected. In his mind, it would be harmless fun, a way to show the difference between real talent and ordinary people. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the small group. He was looking directly at Sarah now. "Miss, could you come over here for a moment?" Sarah looked up from the table she was cleaning, surprised to be addressed directly by one of the guests. She glanced around to make sure he was talking to her, then walked over cautiously. "Yes, sir?" she said quietly, her voice polite but uncertain. Marcus smiled what he thought was a friendly smile. The group of wealthy guests gathered closer, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever entertainment Marcus had planned. "I was just telling my friends here about the beauty of classical music," Marcus said, gesturing grandly toward the concert hall. "And I thought it might be fun, educational really, to demonstrate the difference between trained artistry and, well, natural instinct." Sarah stood quietly, not understanding where this conversation was going. She could sense that the attention of the entire group was focused on her, and it made her uncomfortable. She just wanted to finish her work and go home. "What I'm suggesting," Marcus continued, his voice growing more confident as his idea took shape, "is that you try playing something on the piano for us, just for fun, of course. It would be fascinating to see what happens when someone without musical training approaches such a sophisticated instrument." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. The wealthy guests looked between Marcus and Sarah, some smiling with anticipation, others looking slightly uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at Marcus, then at the expectant faces surrounding her. She could see that they thought this would be amusing. A simple cleaning lady trying to play the same piano that the great Marcus Beaumont had just used to create magic. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah said softly, trying to back away from the group. "I really need to finish my work." But Marcus was committed to his plan now. The audience was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. He felt like a conductor orchestrating an interesting social experiment. "Come now," he said with what he thought was encouraging enthusiasm. "It will just take a minute. What harm could it do? I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you can do." The suggestion spread through the reception like wildfire. Word traveled quickly among the wealthy guests that Marcus Beaumont, the evening's star performer, was about to provide them with unexpected entertainment. People began gathering around, champagne glasses in hand, curious to see what would happen next. Sarah felt trapped. More and more people were looking at her now, their faces showing a mixture of amusement and anticipation. She could see some of them whispering to each other and pointing in her direction. A few had already pulled out their expensive phones, ready to record what they expected would be an amusing moment. "Really, sir, I should get back to work," Sarah tried again, clutching her cleaning cloth tightly in her hands. "My supervisor will be upset if I don't finish on time." But Marcus was feeling more confident by the minute. The crowd of admirers around him was growing larger, and he enjoyed being the center of attention. In his mind, this was all harmless fun, a way to show these sophisticated people the vast difference between real musical talent and ordinary people who had never received proper training. Nonsense, Marcus said with a wave of his hand. I'm sure your supervisor will understand. This is all in the name of cultural education. He turned to address the growing crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a wonderful opportunity here to witness something quite unique. Dr. Hamilton from Columbia University nodded thoughtfully. It could indeed be quite instructive, he agreed. We so rarely get to observe the untrained approach to classical music. Mrs. Wellington adjusted her pearl necklace and smiled. How delightful. Marcus, you always find such creative ways to teach us about music. Sarah looked around desperately, hoping someone might suggest that this wasn't a good idea. But all she saw were excited faces waiting for the show to begin. These people saw her as entertainment, not as a real person with feelings. To them, she was just part of the evening's program. A younger man in an expensive suit laughed softly. This should be interesting. I've always wondered what would happen if you put a regular person in front of a concert piano. His wife, wearing a dress that cost more than Sarah made in 3 months, giggled. It's like watching someone try to paint who's never held a brush. Educational, as Marcus said. The comment stung, but Sarah tried not to show it. She had dealt with wealthy people looking down on her before. Usually she could just ignore them and focus on her work. But now she was the center of their attention and there seemed to be no way to escape. Marcus gestured grandly toward the concert hall, where the magnificent Steinway grand piano sat waiting on the stage. The same piano he had used to create Magic just an hour earlier now seemed like a mountain Sarah was being asked to climb. The piano is right there, Marcus announced to the crowd. All tuned and ready to go. It would be fascinating to hear what our friend here can produce. He looked at Sarah with what he thought was an encouraging smile. Don't worry, nobody expects anything professional. We're all just curious to hear what natural instinct sounds like. The crowd murmured with approval. Someone called out, "What a wonderful idea." Another person said, "This will be so educational for all of us." Sarah felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She realized that refusing to play would probably make things worse. These people would think she was being difficult or ungrateful. They might complain to her supervisor, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. "I really don't know how to play," she said quietly, making one last attempt to get out of the situation. Marcus chuckled good-naturedly. "Of course you don't. That's exactly the point. We want to hear what happens when someone approaches the piano without any preconceived notions about technique or style. It might be quite refreshing, actually." A famous art critic who had been standing nearby joined the conversation. Marcus is absolutely right. Sometimes the most interesting sounds come from complete innocence. No rules, no training, just pure instinct. The crowd began moving toward the concert hall, expecting Sarah to follow. Some people were already discussing what they thought might happen. Would she be too scared to press the keys? Would she try to play a children's song? Would she just hit random notes? "Come along," Marcus said, putting his hand on Sarah's shoulder in what he thought was a friendly gesture. "This will be fun for everyone. And who knows? You might discover you have some hidden talent." Sarah felt like she was walking toward her own execution. Each step toward the concert hall felt heavier than the last. The wealthy guests followed behind them, chattering excitedly about the unusual entertainment they were about to witness. The concert hall looked different now. During Marcus's performance, it had been dark except for the stage lights. Now all the lights were on, making everything bright and exposed. The piano sat in the center of the stage like a sleeping giant, its black surface reflecting the overhead lights. Marcus led the group down the aisle toward the stage. "Everyone gather around," he called out cheerfully. "We want to get a good view of our impromptu performance." The wealthy guests arranged themselves in the first few rows of seats, their phones ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Some were already sharing the moment on social media, telling their followers about the amusing situation they were witnessing. Sarah stood at the edge of the stage, looking up at the piano that seemed impossibly large and intimidating. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it. She had cleaned this concert hall hundreds of times, but she had never imagined she would ever step onto this stage. "Go ahead," Marcus encouraged from the audience. "Step right up. The piano won't bite." A few people in the crowd laughed at his joke. Someone called out, "Take your time, dear. We're all very patient." Sarah slowly climbed the steps to the stage. Each footstep echoed in the large hall, making her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. The bright lights made her squint, and she could see the expectant faces of the audience clearly. Marcus was beaming with satisfaction. He had successfully created an entertaining situation for his wealthy friends. In his mind, this would be a charming story they would all remember. The night the great Marcus Beaumont gave them a lesson in the difference between real talent and ordinary people. "Now," Marcus called out from his seat in the front row, "just sit down at the bench and try playing anything that comes to mind. Don't overthink it. Just let your natural instincts guide you." Sarah approached the piano bench slowly. The instrument was even more beautiful up close. The keys were perfectly white and black, arranged in the pattern she had seen so many times, but never touched. She could smell the wood polish and feel the history of all the great musicians who had played this same piano. The audience waited in anticipation, their phones recording, their faces showing amusement and curiosity. They expected to hear clumsy attempts at children's songs or perhaps just random noise as Sarah pressed keys without any understanding of music. Marcus leaned back in his seat, completely confident that he was about to provide his friends with an entertaining demonstration of why musical training mattered. He had no idea that his simple plan was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Sarah sat down on the bench and placed her hands in her lap. She looked out at the audience of wealthy strangers who saw her as nothing more than entertainment. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. What happened next would change everything. Sarah sat on the piano bench, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes watching her every move. The concert hall felt enormous around her, and the silence was almost overwhelming. She could hear people shifting in their seats, waiting for the entertainment to begin. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone could hear it. She looked down at her hands, which were still trembling slightly. These same hands had cleaned toilets and scrubbed floors for the past 3 years. Now they were expected to touch the keys of a piano worth more than she would earn in 10 years. "Whenever you're ready, dear," called out Mrs. Wellington from the front row. Her voice was kind, but Sarah could hear the amusement underneath. "We're all very excited to hear what you can do." Marcus leaned forward in his seat, his arms crossed with confidence. He was completely sure about what would happen next. Sarah would press some keys randomly, maybe try to play Happy Birthday or Mary Had a Little Lamb, and everyone would have a good laugh. Then they could all return to the reception and talk about what an interesting experiment it had been, and it. "Be nervous," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Remember, nobody expects anything complicated. Just play whatever feels natural to you." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and tried to block out the voices and the staring faces. She thought about her mother, who was at home waiting for her to return from work. She thought about the bills that needed to be paid and the rent that was due next week. She needed this job, and making these important people angry would be a disaster. But there was something else in her mind, too. Something these wealthy strangers couldn't see or understand. As she sat at the beautiful piano, memories began flooding back. Memories of another time, another life, when music had been everything to her. She remembered her tiny apartment years ago, where she had practiced on an old keyboard for hours every day. She remembered her teacher's voice telling her she had real talent. She remembered the acceptance letter from Juilliard that had made her cry with joy. And she remembered the day she had to give it all up. "Is everything all right up there?" Dr. Hamilton asked from the audience. "Take your time, but we are quite curious to hear your attempt." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the keys in front of her. They were perfectly arranged, each one representing a different sound, a different emotion. She knew these keys better than these people could ever imagine. But they saw her as just a cleaning lady who had never touched a piano in her life. The audience was getting slightly restless. A few people checked their phones. Someone whispered to their companion, They had expected this to be quick and amusing, not a long, drawn-out affair. "Perhaps she's too nervous," suggested the art critic. "It can be quite intimidating to perform in front of an audience, even an informal one like this." Marcus nodded, thoughtfully. "You're probably right, but that's part of what makes this so interesting. We're seeing the natural fear that untrained people have when faced with a sophisticated instrument." Sarah heard their words and felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. They were talking about her like she wasn't there, like she was some kind of laboratory specimen to be studied. They had no idea who she really was or what she had sacrificed to be where she was today. She thought about her mother again, lying in the hospital bed 3 years ago. The medical bills that had piled up like mountains. The choice she had to make between following her dreams and saving her family. The day she sold her piano to pay for her mother's treatment. "Maybe we should just let her go back to work," suggested a younger woman in the audience. "She seems really uncomfortable." But Marcus shook his head. No, this is actually quite fascinating from a psychological perspective. We're witnessing the natural hesitation that people feel when they encounter something completely outside their experience." Sarah's anger grew stronger. These people thought they knew everything about her based on her uniform and her job. They thought she was just some poor, uneducated person who had never been exposed to culture or art. They had no idea that she had spent years studying music, that she had been accepted to one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. The phones in the audience were still recording. She could see the red lights blinking, capturing what they thought would be an amusing video to share with their friends. "Look at this poor cleaning lady trying to play piano," they would say. "Isn't it funny how some people think they can just sit down and make music?" Sarah felt something shift inside her. The fear and embarrassment were still there, but they were being pushed aside by something stronger. She was tired of being invisible. She was tired of people looking right through her like she didn't matter. She was tired of pretending that she was just a simple cleaning lady with no dreams or talents. "You know what?" Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to the audience. "Maybe I will play something." Her voice was so soft that most people in the audience didn't hear her clearly. But Marcus did, and he smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent. That's the spirit. Just remember, we're all here to learn, not to judge." Sarah almost laughed at the irony of his words. These people were absolutely here to judge. They were here to feel superior and to have something amusing to talk about at their next fancy party. But they had no idea what they were about to hear. She slowly removed her work gloves and placed them carefully on the edge of the piano. Her hands looked small and pale against the dark wood. She flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar sensation of preparing to play. It had been 3 years since she had touched piano keys. 3 years since she had made music instead of just listening to it from a distance while she cleaned. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but the memory of how to hold them properly came back quickly. The audience settled into their seats, ready for the show to begin. Marcus had his phone out too, wanting to capture this moment for posterity. He was already imagining how he would tell this story to other musicians, about the time he conducted an amusing social experiment with a cleaning lady. Sarah looked at the keys one more time. Each black and white rectangle held so many possibilities, so many songs that could be born from her touch. She had missed this feeling more than she had allowed herself to realize. "Here we go," she whispered to herself. She raised her hands above the keyboard. Her fingers curved in the proper position that had been drilled into her during years of lessons. The muscle memory was still there, waiting to be awakened after its long sleep. The audience held its breath, ready to be entertained by what they expected would be a clumsy, embarrassing performance. Marcus leaned forward with anticipation, already, composing the witty comments he would make afterward. But Sarah was no longer thinking about them. As her hands hovered over the keys, she was thinking about Chopin, about the Ballade No. 1 in G minor that had been her signature piece at Juilliard. She was thinking about the way music could tell a story without words, the way it could express emotions that were too deep for language. She was thinking about showing these people exactly who they had underestimated, and then, with the grace and precision of someone who had trained for years to make magic with her hands, Sarah began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were not what anyone expected. Instead of the clumsy, hesitant sounds the audience had prepared themselves to hear, a melody of pure beauty filled the concert hall. Sarah's fingers touched the keys with the confidence of someone who had been born to make music. She began playing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces in all of classical music. The opening notes were soft and mysterious, like a question being asked in the darkness. But there was nothing uncertain about the way Sarah played them. Marcus felt his confident smile freeze on his face. These were not the random key-pressing sounds he had expected. This was real music, played with skill and understanding that took years to develop. His phone, which had been recording for what he thought would be amusing footage, was now capturing something completely different. The audience fell silent in a way that was different from before. Earlier, they had been quiet with anticipation, waiting for entertainment. Now they were quiet with shock, trying to understand what they were hearing. Mrs. Wellington's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. Dr. Hamilton's eyes widened behind his glasses. The art critic, who had been expecting to hear natural instinct, was now listening to technique that rivaled anything he had heard in professional concert halls. Sarah's hands moved across the keys with graceful precision. Her left hand created a foundation of rich, deep notes while her right hand sang the melody above. The music flowed from her fingers like water from a spring, natural and effortless. But this wasn't just technical skill. Sarah was telling a story with the music, painting emotions in sound. The piece began with longing and sadness, like someone remembering a lost love. Her touch on the keys was gentle but sure, each note carefully chosen and perfectly placed. The wealthy guests in the audience began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. This was not the amateur fumbling they had come to witness. This was artistry of the highest level, being performed by someone they had dismissed as just a cleaning lady. Marcus felt a cold feeling growing in his stomach. This was supposed to be a simple demonstration of the difference between trained and untrained musicians. Sarah was supposed to embarrass herself, not embarrass him. He looked around at the other guests and saw confusion and amazement on their faces. As Sarah continued, playing, the music grew more complex. Her fingers flew across the keys with speed and accuracy that would have been impressive in any professional concert. The melody soared and danced, sometimes playful, sometimes dramatic, always beautiful. The ballade told its story in musical language. There were moments of joy that sparkled like sunlight on water. There were passages of deep sadness that seemed to come from the depths of the human heart, and there were sections of power and strength that filled the entire concert hall with sound. Sarah was completely absorbed in the music now. She had forgotten about the audience, forgotten about their phones and their expectations. For the first time in 3 years, she was home. This was where she belonged, not cleaning floors or emptying trash cans, but creating beauty that could touch people's souls. Her eyes were closed as she played, but her fingers knew exactly where to go. The muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice guided her hands. Every technique she had learned, every lesson she had absorbed, every emotion she had experienced was flowing through her fingertips into the piano. The audience was transfixed. Some people had their mouths open in shock. Others had tears forming in their eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. The phones that had been ready to capture amusing footage were now recording something that would be treasured and shared for entirely different reasons. Dr. Hamilton leaned over to Marcus and whispered, "This is extraordinary. Where did she learn to play like this?" Marcus couldn't answer. He was still trying to process what was happening. His simple plan to entertain his wealthy friends had completely backfired. Instead of demonstrating his superiority as a trained musician, he was watching someone he had assumed was unmusical perform with skill that matched his own. The music continued to unfold, each phrase more beautiful than the last. Sarah's interpretation of the ballade was not just technically perfect. It was deeply personal and emotional. She was pouring years of frustration, sadness, and lost dreams into every note. There were moments in the piece where she had to stretch her hands across wide intervals, her fingers spanning distances that only trained pianists could manage. There were rapid passages where her hands moved so quickly they seemed to blur, yet every note was clear and precise. Mrs. Wellington found herself crying. She had heard this piece performed by some of the world's greatest pianists, but never with such raw emotion and authenticity. This was not just a performance. It was a confession, a prayer, a story told in the language of music. The younger guests, who had been ready to laugh and record amusing videos, were now sitting in stunned silence. They realized they were witnessing something special, something that would stay with them long after the evening ended. Sarah reached a particularly dramatic section of the piece, where the music built to a powerful climax. Her entire body moved with the rhythm, her shoulders swaying as her hands commanded the piano to produce sounds of incredible beauty and intensity. The concert hall filled with music that seemed too big and powerful to come from just one person. Marcus felt smaller with each passing moment. He had set up this situation to show everyone how superior trained musicians were to ordinary people. Instead, he was discovering that he had completely misjudged someone based on her appearance and job. The ordinary person he had chosen to humiliate was turning out to be anything but ordinary. As the dramatic section ended and the music returned to the gentle, mysterious theme of the opening, Sarah opened her eyes briefly. She glanced at the audience and saw their shocked, amazed faces. But she wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for her mother, for all the dreams she had been forced to abandon. The end of the piece was approaching. Sarah could feel it building toward the final haunting conclusion. Her hands prepared for the last few phrases, the delicate notes that would bring this musical journey to its close. But first, there were still more surprises to come. The most challenging technical passages were just ahead, and Sarah was ready to show these people exactly what kind of musician they had underestimated. The real revelation was only just beginning. As Sarah moved into the most technically demanding section of the ballade, her playing reached levels that left even Marcus speechless. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with impossible speed and precision, creating cascades of notes that seemed to fall like silver rain from heaven. This was the section that separated good pianists from great ones: the rapid octaves, the complex rhythms, the need to balance multiple melodic lines while maintaining perfect timing. It was a test that many professional musicians struggled to pass, but Sarah played it as if it were as natural as breathing. Kalnine, left hand thundered across the lower keys, creating a foundation of power and drama, while her right hand danced through the intricate melodic passages above. The two hands worked together like partners in a perfect dance, each supporting the other while maintaining their own complex patterns. The audience was completely mesmerized. Mrs. Wellington had given up trying to hide her tears. Dr. Hamilton was leaning forward in his seat, his mouth slightly open in amazement. Even the younger guests, who had come expecting light entertainment, were now witnessing something that would change their understanding of talent forever. Marcus felt his worldview crumbling around him. For years, he had believed that musical ability was something that could be easily identified and categorized. Trained musicians performed in concert halls, while ordinary people listened from the audience. The idea that someone could possess such extraordinary talent while working as a cleaning lady challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. Sarah's playing grew even more intense as she approached the climax of the piece. Her entire body swayed with the music, her face showing the deep concentration and emotion that true artistry required. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from nervousness but from the physical and mental effort of channeling such complex music through her hands. The most difficult passage was coming up, a section where the right hand had to play rapid, intricate patterns while the left hand provided a completely different rhythmic foundation. Many pianists practiced this section for months before they could perform it cleanly. Sarah approached it without hesitation. Her fingers seemed to know exactly where to go, as if they had played this piece hundreds of times before. The muscle memory was still there, preserved through 3 years of silence. Every lesson she had ever taken, every hour she had spent practicing, every correction her teachers had given her, it all came flooding back in this moment. The technical display was breathtaking, but what made Sarah's performance truly extraordinary was the emotion she brought to every note. This wasn't just finger exercises or showing off, it was storytelling at the highest level. Through Chopin's music, she was telling the story of her own life, the dreams, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the hope that still lived in her heart. Dr. Hamilton whispered to the person next to him, "I've heard this piece performed at Carnegie Hall, and it wasn't this good." The art critic was frantically trying to understand what he was witnessing. His trained ear told him this was professional-level playing, but his eyes saw a woman in a cleaning uniform. The contradiction was so complete that he began to question his own assumptions about talent and social class. As Sarah navigated through the most challenging technical passages, she added subtle interpretive touches that revealed deep understanding of the music. She emphasized certain phrases to bring out hidden melodies. She adjusted her timing to create moments of tension and release. She used dynamics, the loud and soft moments, to paint emotional landscapes in sound. These were not the techniques of someone who had learned to play by ear or natural instinct. This was the work of someone who had studied music at the highest levels, who understood not just how to press the right keys, but how to make those keys sing with meaning. Marcus began to realize the full extent of his mistake. He had not just misjudged Sarah's musical ability. He had set up a situation that revealed his own arrogance and prejudice. He had assumed that someone's job and appearance told the complete story of who they were. He had been wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The other wealthy guests were having their own revelations. Many of them had similar attitudes to Marcus. They believed that talent and culture belonged to people like them, people with money and education and the right social connections. Sarah's performance was forcing them to confront the possibility that extraordinary ability could exist anywhere, hidden behind circumstances they didn't understand. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Sarah's playing became even more nuanced and expressive. She shaped each phrase like a sculptor working with clay, molding the music to express exactly what she felt. The sadness in the melody spoke of years of lost opportunities. The moments of brightness reflected dreams that refused to die. Her technique was flawless, but it was the emotional honesty of her playing that truly amazed the audience. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove anything. She was simply sharing her soul through Chopin's beautiful music, letting the audience see into the deepest parts of her heart. The phones that had started recording as a joke were now capturing something precious. This was not amateur hour entertainment. This was art at its purest and most powerful. The wealthy guests realized they were witnessing something they would never forget, something that would change how they saw the world. Mrs. Wellington found herself thinking about her own assumptions and prejudices. How many times had she looked right through service workers, never imagining they might have rich inner lives and extraordinary talents? How many stories like Sarah's had she missed because she never bothered to really see the people around her? As Sarah played the final, haunting phrases of the ballade, the concert hall seemed to hold its breath. Every note was perfect, every emotion precisely expressed. She was bringing one of the greatest pieces of classical music to life with skill that would have been impressive on any stage in the world. The last notes faded into silence, leaving behind a quiet that was profound and reverent. Sarah's hands slowly came to rest on her lap, and she sat still for a moment, returning from the musical world she had created to the reality of the concert hall. What followed would change everything for everyone in that room. The silence that followed Sarah's performance was unlike anything the concert hall had ever experienced. It was not the empty quiet of an absent audience, but the full, heavy silence of people who had just witnessed something that changed their understanding of the world. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed loudly. The wealthy guests sat frozen in their seats, trying to process what they had just heard. Many of them had attended hundreds of classical music performances in their lives, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. Then, slowly, Mrs. Wellington began to clap. Her applause started soft and reverent, like someone applauding in a church. Dr. Hamilton joined her, then the art critic, then others. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with genuine amazement and respect. But this applause was different from the enthusiastic cheering that had followed Marcus's performance earlier in the evening. This was deeper, more thoughtful. These people were not just appreciating technical skill. They were acknowledging that they had witnessed something profound and life-changing. Sarah sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. For 3 years, she had been invisible to these kinds of people. They had walked past her while she cleaned, never seeing her as anything more than part of the background. Now they were standing and applauding her with genuine admiration. Marcus was clapping too, but his applause was mixed with shame and confusion. His face was red with embarrassment as he realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. What was supposed to be a harmless demonstration of musical hierarchy had become a humbling lesson about his own prejudices. As the applause gradually died down, Marcus knew he had to do something. He couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened, or make a joke to smooth things over. He had been wrong in such a fundamental way that it demanded acknowledgement. He walked slowly toward the stage, his confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Sarah watched him approach, unsure of what would happen next. The audience waited quietly, sensing that this moment was far from over. "Miss," Marcus said when he reached the edge of the stage, his voice much quieter than it had been before. I need to apologize, and I need to ask you something important." Sarah looked down at him from the piano bench, her hands still trembling slightly from the emotional intensity of her performance. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity and respect. That was not the playing of someone without musical training. That was extraordinary. The question hung in the air. The entire audience leaned forward to hear Sarah's answer. They all wanted to understand how someone they had dismissed could possess such incredible talent. Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She had kept her story secret for so long that it felt strange to think about sharing it. But these people had just seen her at her most vulnerable, pouring her heart out through Chopin's music. Perhaps it was time for the truth. "I went to Juilliard," she said simply, her voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. The audience gasped collectively. Juilliard was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Only the most talented musicians were accepted there, and only the best of those actually graduated. Dr. Hamilton's eyes widened. "Juilliard? When did you graduate?" "I didn't graduate," Sarah replied, her voice carrying years of sadness. "I had to leave during my 3rd year." Marcus climbed onto the stage, unable to contain his curiosity. "Why? What happened?" Sarah looked out at the audience of wealthy faces, all waiting for her explanation. These people who had money to burn on charity galas and $5,000 tickets had no idea what it was like to have dreams destroyed by financial reality. "My mother got sick," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "Cancer. The medical bills were enormous and insurance didn't cover everything. I had to choose between finishing school and saving my mother's life." The concert hall was completely silent again, but this time the silence was filled with understanding and sympathy rather than shock. "I sold my piano to help pay for her treatment," Sarah continued. "I took whatever jobs I could find to keep making payments. Cleaning work paid the bills and let me help take care of her at home." Mrs. Wellington felt tears streaming down her cheeks again, but for different reasons now. She thought about her own comfortable life where money was never a worry and dreams could be pursued without compromise. "But why are you still cleaning?" asked the art critic, genuinely confused. "If you have that kind of talent, surely there are opportunities." Sarah gave a sad smile. "It's been 3 years since I've played professionally. 3 years since I've practiced regularly. In the music world, that's like disappearing completely. And without a degree from Juilliard, without references from professors, who would hire someone who's been cleaning toilets for 3 years?" Marcus felt the full weight of his earlier arrogance crashing down on him. He had assumed Sarah was just an ordinary person playing dress-up with classical music. In reality, she was a trained musician whose talent rivaled his own, forced into circumstances he could barely imagine. "Your mother," Dr. Hamilton called out gently. "Is she?" "She's alive," Sarah said, and for the first time that evening, she smiled genuinely. "The treatment worked. She's been cancer-free for 2 years now. That's why all of this was worth. The audience sat in respectful silence, absorbing Sarah's story. Many of them were wealthy enough to solve financial problems with a phone call or a check. The idea of having to sacrifice everything for medical bills was foreign to their experience, but they could understand the love and dedication that had driven Sarah's choices. Marcus looked at Sarah with new eyes. He saw not just a talented musician, but someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice for family. Someone who had given up her dreams so that someone else could live. Someone whose character and strength far exceeded his own. "How did you remember that piece so well?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with admiration. "After 3 years away from serious music?" Sarah's expression became distant, as if she were looking back through time. "I listened," she said simply. "Every time I cleaned this concert hall, I listened to the rehearsals and performances. I played along in my mind, keeping the music alive even though I couldn't touch the keys." She gestured around the beautiful concert hall. "I've heard every great pianist who's performed here in the past 3 years. I've learned from all of them while I emptied their trash and cleaned their dressing rooms. Music never left me, even when I had to leave it." The revelation was complete now. The wealthy audience understood that they had not just misjudged Sarah's musical ability. They had been blind to a story of sacrifice, love, and quiet strength that put their own lives into perspective. And Marcus knew that his life had just changed forever. Marcus stood on the stage next to Sarah, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The weight of his actions, his arrogance, his assumptions, his cruel plan to humiliate someone for entertainment, pressed down on him like a heavy stone. "Sarah," he said, using her name for the first time that evening, "I owe you more than just an apology. What I did tonight was wrong, and I'm deeply ashamed of myself." The audience watched this unexpected turn of events with fascination. The great Marcus Beaumont, who had started the evening as the star of the show, was now humbling himself before a woman he had tried to embarrass. "I judged you based on your job and your appearance," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I assumed I knew everything about you without knowing anything at all. I was wrong in every possible way." Sarah looked at him with surprise. She had expected anger or denial, not this honest acknowledgement of his mistakes. Marcus turned to face the audience. "Everyone here tonight witnessed my ignorance and prejudice. But more importantly, you witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah's talent deserves to be heard by the world, not hidden away while she cleans up after people like us." He paused, making a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "Sarah, I want to help you get back to where you belong. Will you let me?" The offer hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds. Sarah had been out of the music world for so long that the idea of returning seemed almost impossible. But looking at Marcus's sincere expression and feeling the supportive energy from the audience, she began to believe that maybe it wasn't too late. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Marcus's mind was racing with possibilities. "I have connections throughout the music world. Conductors, orchestra managers, booking agents. I can introduce you to people who need to hear your talent. I can help you get back into the professional music scene." Dr. Hamilton stood up from his seat. "If I may," he called out, "I have some connections at Juilliard. I know people who could help you finish your degree if that's something you'd want to pursue. Mrs. Wellington rose as well, and I know several music foundations that provide grants for talented musicians who need financial support. What you've shown us tonight, this is exactly the kind of talent that deserves investment." Other audience members began speaking up, offering their own connections and resources. The art critic mentioned music festivals looking for fresh talent. A businessman talked about corporate sponsorship opportunities. Suddenly, the same people who had come to be entertained by Sarah's supposed failure were eager to help launch her success. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. For 3 years she had felt invisible and forgotten. Now she was surrounded by people who wanted to help her reclaim her dreams. "I don't know what to say," she managed, tears forming in her eyes. Marcus stepped closer to her. "Say yes. Say you'll let us help you get back to where you belong." The music world needs artists like you, people who play not just with technical skill but with heart and soul. Sarah thought about her mother at home, probably watching television and waiting for her to return from another night of cleaning. She thought about the dreams she had buried under the weight of necessity. She thought about the piano she had sold and the degree she had never finished, but mostly she thought about the music. The way it felt to play again, to let her fingers dance across the keys and create beauty from silence. The way Chopin's ballade had poured out of her like water from a dam that had finally burst. The feeling of being home again, even for just a few minutes. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, stronger, "Yes, I would like that very much." The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it was celebration rather than shock. They were witnessing the beginning of a comeback story, the resurrection of a dream that had been buried but never truly died. Over the following months, Marcus kept his promise. He introduced Sarah to conductors and music directors throughout the city. He helped her prepare for auditions and connected her with a top-tier management company. Most importantly, he treated her as an equal, a fellow musician whose talent deserved respect. Dr. Hamilton arranged for Sarah to complete her degree at Juilliard through a special program for returning students. Mrs. Wellington's foundation provided a scholarship that covered tuition and living expenses, allowing Sarah to focus on music instead of worrying about paying bills. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 months, Sarah was performing as a guest soloist with regional orchestras. Within a year, she had recorded her first album and was booking concerts across the country. The same Chopin ballade that had revealed her talent in Alice Tully Hall became her signature piece, telling the story of hidden dreams and second chances. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. The humbling experience of that night had forced him to examine his own attitudes and prejudices. He began mentoring young musicians from diverse backgrounds, using his influence to create opportunities for talented people who might otherwise be overlooked. He also started a scholarship fund specifically for music students who had to interrupt their education due to family circumstances. He called it the Second Chance Program, and Sarah was its first recipient and biggest advocate. 2 years after that fateful night, Marcus and Sarah performed together at the same Alice Tully Hall, where their story had begun. They played a duet, Rachmaninoff's Suite No. 2 for 2 pianos, As Equals and Friends. In the audience sat Sarah's mother, healthy and proud, watching her daughter live the dream they had both thought was lost forever. Also in the audience were many of the same wealthy patrons who had witnessed Sarah's first performance, now some of her biggest supporters and advocates. Before they played, Marcus addressed the audience. "Music has the power to transform lives," he said. "But sometimes the most important transformation happens not in the person who plays, but in the person who listens. Tonight, like that evening 2 years ago, we're all here to listen and to learn." Sarah smiled at his words, remembering the scared, invisible woman she had been that night. The journey from cleaning lady to concert pianist hadn't been easy, but it had taught her that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied. As they began to play together, their 2 pianos creating a conversation in musical language, Sarah knew that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfection, but from the courage to begin again. The concert hall filled with the sound of redemption, second chances, and the truth that talent can bloom anywhere, if given the chance to shine. And in that moment, both Marcus and Sarah understood that the real transformation wasn't about returning to old dreams, but about creating new ones built on wisdom, humility, and the knowledge that everyone has a story worth hearing. The applause that followed was not just for their performance but for the journey they had taken together, from judgment to understanding, from arrogance to humility, from hidden talent to recognized artistry. It was the sound of lives changed by the power of music and the courage to see beyond appearances to the truth that lies within every human heart.